Have you ever celebrated a major birthday with model trains? Well, this video shows one way to do it. Hi, this is Burr Stewart, and welcome to part 82 of my continuing series of model railroad videos. In this case, the second one that we celebrated a big milestone birthday. In this case, it was my own birthday. As you can see, happy birthday, Burr, right there on the car. And I ended up taking some video footage of the yards afterwards, too. So we'll show both the operation of the special birthday train and look at the yards in greater detail than we usually have time for in these videos. So I hope you'll enjoy it. To start out, Brian had purchased a Rapido Santa Fe locomotive at a recent swap meet here and was anxious to try it out, along with a Santa Fe passenger car to go with it. So the first thing we did was to run that around the layout. We ran it up to Burlington, as you can see here.
Yeah, I thought so too. Your building was a little more empty than it was last year.
And a few minutes later, we turned the train around and ran it back south from Burlington across the Paul Scholes Bridge. And this gave me a chance to show you the whole Burlington yard as the train was blowing through it. There's the Northwest Olivine on the left, maintenance of way shed. This train in the foreground is our weed sprayer train, some of which was made by J.J. Johnson. And then you can see the Mount Baker backdrop, which is quite close to Burlington. The front track is the Anacortes branch, and these cars are all waiting to get relocated where they belong. On the backdrop is the Bo Edison Foods berry packing plant. Now we come to the Burlington station, which should be on the other end of the yard, but this is where I had room for it. A fictitious mine. The main water valve for the house, very important. And a bridge across the Skagit River. So that's a nice tour of Burlington. Now, a few minutes later, we've come down towards the Delta Y in Everett. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the dynamic brake whine transition from on to off. It crosses over the Skagit River Bridge and into a tunnel. Next, we come through Bayside Yard in Everett. What a great sound effect from the Rapido ESU decoder. Those cabooses I just picked up at the same swap meet. They're 3D printed, really beautiful models, and we'll show you more of them later. South of Bayside, we crossed the Squealer. Hear that? The Squid Bridge. And we make our way along what's called the lowline, just lower than the Delta yard above it. Now, a few minutes later, coming around the corner into the Ballard station and across the Salmon Bay Bridge, GN's Bridge number 4. Those little blue strips of tape I have to take off. They're marking a place where the track gauge is slightly tight, and I haven't fixed it in months. Now we're coming underneath the Emerson Street overpass, as you know, and crawling into the Interbay yard. Quite a while later, Brian had run the train up to the Skycomish yard and turned it around the Rainbow Bridge, which you may have seen in other videos. And now he was heading downhill from Skycomish down to Delta Yard in Everett. This is the train going through the index loop. Whoops. Didn't mean to do that. And the caboose that's above the engine there is in the Bellingham staging tracks, which are hidden behind the trees. Almost hidden. It's good to be able to see what's back there occasionally. That's Mount Index in the backdrop, which is a very prominent feature in that area. And of course below is the Ballard switching area that we haven't finished building. Now while he was driving down to Everett, I took a moment to show you a train that was parked in Bellingham staging because I liked it. I hope you'll like it too. It's another example of 1973 era freight cars. See that weathered cement hopper? There's several of these. These are all going to end up at the Lone Star Cement Factory in South Seattle when we run them through the layout. And there's a sand car that will end up in the Interbay engine terminal. I don't know what, oh yeah, I gave you a close-up shot of that, number 13986. And at the front end, we have 3 very nice-looking GP7s.
Yeah. Rare Earth was opening for him. Really? Yeah. That's a show.
Not to be outdone, our favorite Milwaukee switcher was busy in Argo Yard. And you can see Scott was putting the car cards right on the layout, which is frowned on, but this wasn't a full-on op session, so it didn't matter. Boy, that's a nice-looking switcher. For some reason, the sound got turned off. Something shorted out, I think.
There's a webcam.
Yeah, we still got the brake sound. We'll get it back on. Now I needed to flip that switch for him so we could run back into the yard. But first we had to get the direction right. Not backwards, forwards. There we go.
Burr. Burr.
And now here comes the birthday train. Right through the same area. Watch for that switcher. You'll see us pass it. Isn't that a nice car? Brian lettered up to celebrate my 70th birthday coming up. 25566 is the number of days that I will have been alive. Here's that Milwaukee switcher.
You want to come back through Bayside? I'll take care of it from here. Yeah, run it down through Bayside. Okay.
And of course, a few minutes later, we pass the Squid Bridge. Take another shot of our celebratory passenger car. This Santa Fe locomotive wouldn't normally be on this layout, but we decided that the BN brass were talking to the Santa Fe about a merger as far back as 1973, and they just wanted to check it out. They decided not to pursue it at that time, but it gave us a chance to break in this engine. You might have noticed over on the left that there are some beautiful cabooses that we should check out. These were more of those 3D printed cabooses that Brian and I both picked up at the swap meet last week. Very nice. And while I was at it, I thought I would look at the rest of the layout there in the Delta Yard area. There's the Weyerhaeuser Mill B. If we could just get it in focus. There we go. Now you can see all the way across the aisle to Burlington and Stacy Yard below it. And we might as well go up and look at the narrow gauge town of Opportunity for a minute. There's a deer in the headlights, so to speak. Some equipment that needs to be moved off the main track. See, there's a passenger bus there waiting to take tourists to the mountains, and a couple water tanks, and this beautiful station that my friend Eric Van Nice built many, many years ago, and he recently put the town name of Opportunity on there so we could enjoy it in our narrow gauge empire. Well, after that brief diversion, we're back to running the Burr birthday train on the Burrlington Northern through the middle of the Interbay Yard. I'm really impressed with all the cars that are in here left over from the last operating session. We'll go and look at this in more detail in a minute. Right now the train is just heading towards downtown Seattle. Here are the crossing bells I'm very proud of. The backdrop. The celebratory car one last time. Mount Rainier and the north portal of the tunnel which goes underneath downtown Seattle. And a few minutes later, after turning it on the loop, Brian ran the train the other direction. That's one nice thing about rail fanning on a model railroad. You don't have to wait for hours for trains to be turned around. Isn't that a nice car? Amazing. You know how I'm always talking about reality model railroading? That black blob to the left is a 3D printed proto-throttle holder I was in the middle of installing before we started taking this video. We'll show you that afterwards in a minute. A few hours later, I was downstairs after everyone had gone home, admiring more of the cabooses and the rolling stock and the layout, and I just thought maybe you'd like to get an overview, a little slower paced view of the Interbay Yard, and maybe we'll go over and look at the Bayside Yard. Let's see, there are some very nice logs there on the log car, and that 3-dome tank car we mentioned before, the Boeing Skybox cars, which are really called tool cars, that beautiful weathered reefer, which is one of the best weathered cars on the layout. And of course, this is the Dravis Street overpass. Great rail fanning spot if you're ever in Seattle. And this is the 3 new cabooses that were over in Bayside earlier in the video. They were transferred here during our play date in the afternoon. They're really nice models. I really love the tank cars, all kinds of tank cars, and log cars, both the old ones and the modern ones with the big steel spikes on them. That's a really nice bulkhead flat car that was very common in this era. And there are even 3 locomotives for us to admire. If you've been watching shorts on my YouTube channel, these engines have been pulling a train around the layout in the last few days. And this track at the edge of the layout, it needs a plexiglass safety cover so the cars won't fall off onto the floor. But this is the Pier 9091 terminal where they loaded different types of materials. And you can see right where I'm pointing on the spins diagram where that track is in the yard. One of our industrial switching spots that's part of the yard work. It looks like the auto racks have been moved to some other train. And look, there's the proto throttle holder. I managed to get it installed after the previous shot. And then I moved over the NCE throttle holder, so we're all set to go. And that was just kind of a relaxed overview of Interbay Yard for you. I'll try to do this more often. We get in such a hurry because we're watching trains. We don't just enjoy the layout. So there on the right-hand side, you can see the Bellingham staging tracks that are at the far north end of the layout, and a few airplanes to remind me of the days when I used to be a private pilot. So moving over to the Bayside yard in Everett, the front track is the Port of Everett, and then the rest of the tracks are all used for classifying cars and setting up for some of the branch trains like the Woodinville local and the Marysville local, the Jet Job, all those trains. And whenever you see loaded woodchip cars like that, it means they haven't been switched into the Scott paper mill, which is in the far distance there. I'll show you that in a different angle. One of my favorite things in the yard at the moment, as I just sit here looking at it, is two tank cars that ended up accidentally next to each other. So we'll pan down and look at those. One of those is a bromine car, I think. Or, yeah, pretty sure that's what it says there. And the other one is a chlorine tank, so those are both important to handle carefully. Remember this weathered box car, the Northern Pacific Green? That was featured in one of our earlier videos as it moved from one train to the next on its way to its destination. This is an old Fine Scale Miniatures freight house that my friend Andy built when we were both in high school in the late 1960s. And it's still there. It's still in use. And there on the engine-ready track is that SW1500 that have been in some of my recent videos. And there's a couple of new tangent cabooses that Brian weathered recently. Whoops, there I go again. And on the left is the Scott paper tracks. And eventually we'll get a building put in there so it'll look more like a paper mill. You can see one of the cars has been unloaded, but those will all get unloaded before our next operating session. And of course we celebrate swing dancing in a scene right next to the station there. And this is a really beautiful caboose I've wanted to have on the layout for many years. And I was able to find it at the swap meet just last weekend. As well as this 3D printed woodchip car. Very nice, that brown GN car. And there we have some representative locomotives. And that's an overview of the Bayside Yard. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and you'll come back and watch many other videos on my channel. For now, as usual, this is Burr Stewart, wishing you much fun with trains.